I was tightening the last fitting on the propane line when I heard her voice cut through the crisp Vermont morning like a chainsaw through butter. "Excuse me, but what exactly do you think you are doing with that equipment?" I looked up from my crouched position to see a woman in her mid-40s standing at the edge of the volunteer ambulance garage property, clipboard in hand, designer sunglasses perched on her head despite the overcast sky. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tight it could have given her a facelift, and she wore a navy blazer that screamed, "I need to speak to your manager," even before she opened her mouth. "Working on the propane line," I said, straightening up and wiping my hands on my jeans. "Who are you?" "I'm Karren Pemberton, president of the Greenfield Meadows Homeowners Association, and I need to see your permits for this work immediately." I felt my jaw tighten. The volunteer ambulance service in Brattleboro had been here for 30 years, long before the housing development went in next door. "My name is Fischer, and I had been volunteering as both an EMT and maintenance guy for the past 8 years. The garage sat on the edge of the property line, technically within view of some of the newer homes, but it was grandfathered in under every zoning law imaginable. "This is volunteer fire department property," I explained, keeping my voice level. "The HOA has no jurisdiction here." Karen's face flushed pink. "That propane hose is an eyesore and violates Section 14.3 of our Community Standards Handbook. It needs to be removed or buried underground immediately." "It is underground," I said, pointing to where the line ran beneath the grass. "This is just the connection point, and again, this is not HOA property." She stepped closer, her heels sinking slightly into the soft ground. "The aesthetics of this facility directly impact our property values. I have already received 17 complaints from residents about the appearance of this garage." I doubted that. Most of our neighbors were grateful we were there. "Last month, we had saved the life of a kid from one of those houses when he had an allergic reaction. His parents had sent us a fruit basket." "Look, Mrs. Pemberton," I started. "Miss Pemberton," she corrected sharply. "Miss Pemberton. I understand you have concerns, but this propane line feeds our emergency heating system and backup generator. Without it, we cannot keep the ambulances operational in winter. People's lives depend on this equipment." She looked at the exposed section of hose where I was working, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I do not see any official municipal markings. How do I know this is even legal?" Before I could respond, my radio crackled. "Brian, we need you inside." "We have got a call coming in," said Tommy, one of the other volunteers. "I have got to go," I told Karren, gathering my tools. "We can discuss this later if you want to contact our chief." "I most certainly will," she said, but I was already jogging toward the garage. The call was for a minor car accident on Route 9. Nothing too serious, but it took us 3 hours between transport and paperwork. When I got back to the garage around 2 in the afternoon, I noticed something was wrong immediately. The access panel where I had been working was open, and the propane hose was gone. "What the hell?" I muttered, kneeling down to examine the connection point. Someone had actually removed the hose, disconnecting our backup propane supply to the generator and heating system. The fittings were clean, done with tools, not torn out. This was deliberate. Chief Richards came out when he saw me examining the damage. He was a 62-year-old former firefighter from Boston who had retired to Vermont and could not stay away from emergency services. "Please tell me that is not what I think it is," he said. "Someone stole our propane hose, about 50 feet of it plus the fittings." "Stole it? Who would steal a propane hose?" I told him about my encounter with Karren Pemberton that morning. His weathered face darkened. "She actually took it." "That is destruction of emergency services property. That is a felony in Vermont. We do not know for sure it was her, I said, though I had a pretty good idea. Who else would it be? Brian, we need that hose. The forecast says we are getting the first real cold snap this week, lows in the teens. Without that propane backup, if we lose power, we cannot keep the ambulances warm. The medical supplies will freeze, the diesel will gel, and we will be out of service. I pulled out my phone. Let me try calling her first. Maybe we can resolve this without involving the police. Chief Richards shook his head. You are nicer than me. I would have already called Sheriff Morrison. I found Karren's number through the HOA website and dialed. She answered on the second ring. Miss Pemberton, this is Brian Fischer from the Volunteer Ambulance Service. Did you remove the propane hose from our property? I had it relocated for safekeeping until you can provide proper documentation that it meets community standards. I felt heat rising up my neck. You stole our equipment. That is a crime. I did no such thing. I removed a community eyesore in accordance with my duties as HOA president. The hose is safe, and you can have it back once you provide the necessary permits and agree to install appropriate screening. That line feeds our emergency heating system. We need it back now. Then I suggest you expedite your permit applications. Good afternoon, Mr. Fischer. She hung up. Chief Richards was watching my face. That bad, she admitted to taking it, says we can have it back when we provide permits that we do not need for property she does not control. Call Sheriff Morrison. This has gone far enough. Sheriff Tom Morrison arrived 40 minutes later in his cruiser, along with Deputy Jenkins. Morrison was a tall man with gray hair and the patient demeanor of someone who had seen everything small-town New England could throw at him. I explained the situation while showing him the disconnected propane system. He took notes and photographs. And she admitted to taking it, he asked. Over the phone, yes, said she had it relocated for safekeeping. Morrison shook his head slowly. That is theft of emergency services equipment. Vermont Statute 18 VSA Section 1066. That is a Class D felony. Does she understand the implications? I do not think she cares, I said. She seems to think being HOA president gives her authority over everything in sight. Let me go talk to her. Where can I find her? I gave him Karren's address from the HOA website, and he headed out. Chief Richards and I waited at the garage, making calls to try to source replacement hose. The problem was not just the cost, which would come out of our already tight volunteer budget, but the specialized nature of the fittings. This was not hardware store stuff. We were looking at several days minimum to get proper replacements, and that cold front was coming tomorrow night. Morrison returned an hour later looking frustrated. She is refusing to return the hose, claims it is community property because it was visible from HOA homes. I explained that is not how property law works, but she is not budging, says she will see us in court. Can you arrest her? Chief Richards asked. I can and probably will, but that does not get you your hose back immediately. She claims she had it removed by a contractor and does not know where they stored it. Without a warrant to search her property, my hands are tied for the moment. How long for a warrant? I asked. Judge Patterson is in Bennington until tomorrow afternoon. Earliest I could get you one is tomorrow evening, probably closer to 6 or 7 p.m. Chief Richards swore under his breath. The temperature is supposed to drop to 12 degrees tomorrow night. We cannot leave the ambulances in an unheated garage in that weather. I understand the urgency, Morrison said. I am going to charge her with theft and interference with emergency services. That might make her reconsider. But in the meantime, you folks might want to consider temporary heating solutions. After Morrison left, we spent the rest of the afternoon making arrangements. We borrowed 2 industrial space heaters from the fire department in the next town over, but they would only do so much in the large garage. The real problem was the generator. Without the propane backup, if we lost grid power during the storm, we would have no heat at all. I went home that evening to my small house on the outskirts of Brattleboro, frustrated and angry. My wife Jessica was in the kitchen making dinner when I walked in. "Rough day?" she asked, seeing my face. I told her the whole story. Jessica was a nurse at Brattleboro Memorial Hospital and understood the implications immediately. She stole equipment from the ambulance service. Is she insane? What if someone has an emergency? Morrison is filing charges, but we might not get the hose back in time. There is a storm coming. Can you buy new hose? Not in time, and we should not have to. It is our property. She had no right to take it. Jessica stirred the pasta sauce with more force than necessary. Some people think rules do not apply to them. I see it at the hospital all the time. This HOA president sounds like a piece of work. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about worst-case scenarios. What if we got a call during the coldest part of the storm and the ambulance would not start? What if someone died because of Karren Pemberton's power trip? The next morning, I was back at the garage early. Tommy was already there, checking the borrowed heaters. "These are going to run up the electric bill," he said, "but they should keep things from freezing if we cluster the equipment." We spent the morning reorganizing the garage, moving the ambulances closer together, positioning the heaters strategically. It felt like preparing for a siege. Around noon, Karren Pemberton showed up again, this time with 2 other people, a man and a woman in their 50s. "Mr. Fischer," Karren called out as I was checking tire pressure on Ambulance 2. "I have brought the HOA vice president and treasurer to witness the violations occurring on this property." I stood up, wrench in hand. "You stole our equipment, and now you are back to harass us some more." "I removed a community nuisance, and I am documenting additional violations. Your vehicles are not properly screened from neighborhood view. The grass needs mowing, and there are oil stains on the driveway that violate environmental standards." The man with her, who looked deeply uncomfortable, cleared his throat. "Karren, this is not HOA property. Maybe we should, Robert, we discuss this. Community standards apply to all visible properties within the development boundaries." "But Chief Richards told me this property is municipally owned," the woman said nervously. "It does not matter, Susan. Our residents pay premium prices for their homes, and they expect premium surroundings. This garage is an eyesore, and if they will not voluntarily comply with basic aesthetic standards, we will pursue legal action." I was about to respond when Sheriff Morrison's cruiser pulled up, followed by a second police vehicle. Morrison got out, along with Deputy Jenkins and another officer I did not recognize. "Miss Pemberton," Morrison said, walking over, "I have a warrant to search your property for the stolen propane hose and related equipment." Karren's face went white, then red. "Stolen? I told you I had it removed for the community's benefit." "That is theft. You can explain your reasoning to the judge. Are you going to tell me where the hose is, or do we need to execute this warrant?" For the first time, Karren looked uncertain. Robert and Susan were backing away slowly, clearly wanting nothing to do with this situation. "I may have acted hastily," Karren said stiffly. "The contractor I hired stored the hose in my garage. I will return it immediately." "Too late for that," Morrison said. "You are under arrest for theft of emergency services equipment and interference with emergency operations. Please turn around and put your hands behind your back." "This is ridiculous. I am an HOA president. I was protecting property values. You are a thief. Hands behind your back." Morrison cuffed her while reading her rights. Karren sputtered protests the whole time, her face scarlet with indignation. Robert and Susan watched in stunned silence. "Officers are going to your house to retrieve the stolen property," Morrison continued. "If you have anything else you want to tell me about where it is, now would be the time." "It is in my garage on the left side, coiled up. This is absurd. I demand to speak to my attorney." "You will get that opportunity at the station. Deputy Jenkins, transport her, please." As Karren was led away, still protesting loudly about property rights and community standards, Robert approached me cautiously. "Mr. Fischer, I want to apologize. Most of the HOA board had no idea Karren was doing any of this. We were just as surprised as anyone when she called this emergency meeting today about the ambulance station." "Did you know she stole our equipment?" I asked. "No, absolutely not. She said something about addressing property concerns, but she never mentioned taking anything. If we had known, we would have stopped her. We all use the ambulance service. My wife had chest pains last year, and your team saved her life." Susan nodded vigorously. "Karren has been getting more aggressive with enforcement lately. Last month, she fined the Johnsons $300 because their mailbox was the wrong shade of black. We have been talking about removing her as president, but she is very intimidating." Chief Richards came out of the garage, having watched the whole scene. "So what happens now with the HOA?" "We will hold an emergency board meeting," Robert said. "Karren is clearly not fit to continue as president, and we need to formally apologize to the volunteer service and make it clear the HOA has no authority here." "That would be appreciated," Chief Richards said. Morrison's officers returned 20 minutes later with the propane hose, coiled in the back of a pickup truck. They also brought several large decorative screens. "She had these screens in her garage too," one officer said. "Said she was planning to force you to install them around the propane connection." I shook my head in disbelief. "She really thought she could dictate what we did with our property." It took me the rest of the afternoon to reinstall the propane hose. The fittings needed to be checked carefully because I did not know how roughly it had been handled. Tommy helped me test the connections and purge the lines. By 6 p.m., we had the system fully operational again, just as the temperature started dropping. Morrison stopped by later that evening with an update. "Miss Pemberton is being arraigned tomorrow. Her lawyer is already talking about a plea deal. The district attorney is not happy about this. Theft of emergency services equipment carries serious penalties." "What kind of penalties?" I asked. "For a Class D felony in Vermont, up to 5 years in prison and $15,000 in fines. Given the circumstances and the potential risk to public safety, I do not think the DA is going to go easy on her." "I just want to make sure this never happens again," I said. "Oh, it will not. Not from her, anyway. Her lawyer knows this looks really bad. She interfered with emergency services during an approaching winter storm. If someone had gotten hurt because your ambulances were not operational, we would be looking at even more serious charges." The storm hit that night, right on schedule. Temperatures plummeted to 11 degrees and we got 6 inches of snow. The propane system worked perfectly, keeping the garage warm and the ambulances ready. We had 3 calls that night, including one serious car accident on I-91. The Jensen's teenage son had slid off the road into a ditch. We got him to the hospital with a broken leg and mild hypothermia. If the ambulances had not been operational, the response time from the next closest station would have been another 20 minutes. In that weather, it could have been the difference between a broken leg and something much worse. Karren Pemberton's arraignment happened 2 days later. I did not attend, but Sheriff Morrison called me with the details. She had pleaded not guilty initially, but her lawyer convinced her to change it to guilty with an explanation. The judge was not sympathetic. Judge Patterson is not fond of people who think their personal authority trumps emergency services, Morrison told me. He was a volunteer firefighter himself back in the day. He gave her 18 months in prison, suspended to 6 months if she completes community service, and a $10,000 fine. $5,000 goes to the state, and $5,000 goes to the volunteer ambulance service as restitution for damages and costs. 6 months in prison, I said, surprised. Suspended sentence. She will do 600 hours of community service instead if she keeps her nose clean. Patterson was pretty clear that if she violates probation, she does the full 18 months. Plus, she is banned from holding any HOA office for 10 years and has to resign immediately. What about the HOA? Robert, whatever his name is, took over as interim president. They passed a resolution formally acknowledging the ambulance station's independence and apologizing for the interference. They also voted to contribute $2,000 annually to your volunteer service as a community support gesture. That was unexpected. Really? I think they are trying to avoid a lawsuit. You would have a pretty good case for harassment and interference. But it sounds like most of the board are decent people who were just overshadowed by a bully. Over the next few weeks, things settled down. Karren Pemberton was assigned to do her community service hours at the county road maintenance department, picking up litter and cleaning drainage ditches. I heard through the grapevine that it was not going well for her. Apparently, being told what to do by a supervisor was not something she handled gracefully. The HOA, under Robert's leadership, turned out to be much more reasonable. They invited Chief Richards to one of their meetings to discuss any legitimate concerns residents had about the ambulance station. Most of the questions were curiosity more than complaints. How many calls did we get? What were the response times? Could residents take CPR classes? It was actually productive. The weather continued to get colder as December rolled in. Our propane system worked flawlessly, keeping everything operational through several serious storms. We had a busy month with the usual winter emergencies. Heart attacks from shoveling snow, car accidents on icy roads, a chimney fire, and one memorable call about a guy who got his tongue stuck to a metal pole on a dare. I ran into Karren Pemberton in person for the first time since her arrest in early January. I was getting coffee at the Green Mountain Cafe in town when she walked in, wearing an orange safety vest over her expensive coat, clearly on a break from her community service. She saw me and froze, her face going through several emotions before settling on something between anger and humiliation. "Mr. Fischer," she said stiffly. "Miss Pemberton, I suppose you are satisfied with the outcome of your complaint." I took a sip of my coffee. "I did not file a complaint. You stole our equipment and the sheriff arrested you. That was your choice, not mine. I was trying to maintain community standards. I was doing my job. Your job was not to steal property that keeps emergency services operational. You could have gotten someone killed." She looked away. The judge made that point rather emphatically, as did my lawyer, my ex-husband, my mother, and basically everyone else I know. There was a long pause. She ordered a coffee and we stood awkwardly waiting. "For what it is worth," she finally said, "I am sorry. I got carried away with the authority. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood, but I was really just being controlling. My therapist says it is something I need to work on. I had not expected an apology. Thank you for saying that. The community service is horrible," she continued. "I spent 4 hours yesterday cleaning out storm drains. Do you know what is in storm drains? I cannot even describe it, but I suppose I deserve it. I risked people's lives over aesthetics. That is pretty indefensible." "We all make mistakes," I said, surprising myself with my generosity. The important thing is learning from them. I have definitely learned. I am never joining another HOA board again. Once I finish my sentence, I am just going to mind my own business and let other people do the same. We got our coffees and parted ways. I did not feel satisfied exactly, but I felt like maybe she actually understood what she had done wrong. That was something. The rest of January and February were routine for volunteer emergency services, which meant controlled chaos. We had our share of calls, and the propane system continued to work perfectly. Chief Richards posted a small plaque near the garage door that read, "Community support appreciated, community interference not tolerated." It made me smile every time I saw it. In March, Robert from the HOA stopped by with a check for $2,000, the first installment of their annual support contribution. "The board wanted me to deliver this personally," he said. "We also wanted to invite you and the other volunteers to our spring community barbecue. We thought it would be nice for residents to meet the people who keep them safe." "That is very kind of you," I said, accepting the check. "We would be happy to attend. It is the least we can do, and between you and me, Karren's actions were a wake-up call for a lot of us. We were so focused on property values and appearances that we forgot what actually makes a community valuable. Having emergency services nearby, having volunteers who donate their time, having neighbors who help each other. That is what matters." The barbecue happened in May, on a beautiful spring afternoon. About 60 residents showed up along with 15 volunteers from our service. People asked questions. Kids got to sit in the ambulances, and we demonstrated some of the equipment. It was nice to put faces to the addresses we sometimes rushed to in emergencies. Karren Pemberton was not there, of course. I heard she had finished her community service in April and was keeping a low profile. She had sold her house and moved to somewhere in New Hampshire, looking for a fresh start. I did not blame her. Small towns have long memories. The summer was busy with the usual mix of accidents, medical emergencies, and a few water rescues from the Connecticut River. Our propane system sat idle during the warm months, but I checked it regularly, making sure everything stayed in good working order. The lessons from the previous winter had taught me not to take our equipment for granted. In August, we got a surprise visit from a reporter from the Brattleboro Reformer, the local newspaper. She had heard about the incident with the HOA and wanted to do a story about volunteer emergency services and the challenges they face. "I am writing a piece about how communities sometimes take their emergency services for granted," she explained. "The theft of your propane hose seemed like an extreme example of that." I was hesitant at first, not wanting to drag up old drama, but Chief Richards convinced me it might be educational. "People need to understand that volunteer services are fragile," he said. "We run on tight budgets, donated time, and community goodwill. When someone interferes with that, it has real consequences." The article ran in September, just as the weather started cooling down again. It was fair and balanced, explaining what had happened without making Karren out to be a monster. It focused more on the importance of volunteer services and how residents could support them. We got several donations after it ran, and 3 new people signed up for volunteer training. October brought the first hard freeze, and I fired up the propane system for the season. It worked perfectly, purring along and keeping the garage at a comfortable 65 degrees. Tommy and I stood there listening to it, appreciating the simple fact that it was working. "Think we will have any more HOA drama this year?" Tommy asked. "I hope not. I think everyone learned their lesson." You know what the funny thing is? If Karren had just come to us like a normal person and said she had concerns, we probably could have worked something out. We could have installed some screening, made things look nicer. We are not unreasonable. Control freaks do not ask. They demand truth. Hey, speaking of demanding, are you working Thanksgiving? I need someone to cover the afternoon shift. I can do that. Jessica is working too, so we are doing our dinner on Friday anyway. That Thanksgiving, I spent the afternoon at the garage with 2 other volunteers, playing cards and eating leftover turkey sandwiches between the usual holiday calls. Overeating, family arguments, and deep fryer disasters kept us moderately busy. But the garage was warm, the ambulances were ready, and everything worked the way it was supposed to. A year after the theft, Sheriff Morrison stopped by for a routine visit. We tried to maintain good relationships with all the local law enforcement agencies since we worked together regularly. I was reviewing old cases and came across the Pemberton file, he said. Thought you might want to know she successfully completed her probation. No violations, finished all her community service, paid her fines. She stayed out of trouble. That is good to hear, I said. It is one of the few cases where I think someone actually learned something. Most repeat offenders do not change. But sometimes getting arrested is the wake-up call people need. Think she will stay out of trouble? Hard to say. But she moved out of state, is not involved in any HOA business, and from what I hear, she is working a regular job and keeping her head down. That is about the best outcome we could hope for. December came around again, bringing with it heavy snow and bitter cold. The propane system worked flawlessly through storm after storm. We had our busiest winter yet, with call volumes up 20% from the previous year. But we were ready. The equipment worked, the garage stayed warm, and the ambulances were always operational. One particularly brutal night in January, with temperatures hitting -5 and wind chills even worse, we got a call for a cardiac arrest at one of the houses in Greenfield Meadows, the HOA neighborhood. We rolled out immediately, the ambulance starting without hesitation despite the extreme cold. The patient was a man in his 70s, and we worked on him for 20 minutes before getting a pulse back. We transported him to Brattleboro Memorial, where Jessica was working in the ER that night. She told me later he made a full recovery. The man's wife came to the garage a week later to thank us. "You saved my husband's life," she said, tears in her eyes. "I do not know what I would have done without him. Thank you so much." "We are just glad we could help," I said. "I heard about what happened last year with that awful HOA president stealing your equipment. I want you to know most of us in the neighborhood are horrified by what she did. We are grateful you are here. We appreciate that." She handed me an envelope. "This is from our neighbors and us. We took up a collection to support your volunteer service. It is not much, but we wanted to help." Inside was $3,500 in checks from various residents. I was stunned. "This is incredibly generous," I managed to say. "It is the least we can do. You keep us safe. We should support you." Chief Richards and I used the money to upgrade some of our medical equipment and put the rest into our emergency fund. It was a reminder that for every person who caused problems, there were dozens more who appreciated what we did. Spring came around again, bringing with it the annual HOA barbecue. It had become a tradition, a way for the community to connect with the volunteers who served them. Robert, still serving as HOA president, had turned out to be excellent at the job. He ran the association with common sense and cooperation instead of intimidation. "We are thinking of renaming the development," he told me at the barbecue. "Greenfield Meadows has some baggage now, you know, from the news coverage. We are considering something like Riverside Commons. More collaborative sounding. Whatever makes people happy," I said, "as long as you keep letting us do our job." "That is guaranteed. Actually, we are putting it in the HOA bylaws. No interference with emergency services, no authority over municipal property, and mandatory cooperation with public safety operations. We are making sure what happened with Karren can never happen again. That is smart. It is necessary. We got complacent, let one person have too much power, and it almost had tragic consequences. We are fixing that. As summer rolled around again, I found myself reflecting on the whole experience. In a weird way, Karren Pemberton's theft had made things better. It had forced conversations about the importance of volunteer services, brought the community together in support, and led to real, positive changes in how the HOA operated. Of course, I would have preferred to skip the drama and just have our equipment left alone. But life does not work that way. Sometimes it takes a crisis to make people appreciate what they have. I never saw Karren Pemberton again. I heard through various channels that she was doing okay in New Hampshire, working as a sales associate at a furniture store, living quietly. Part of me hoped she was happy. Holding grudges is exhausting, and she had paid for her mistakes. The propane hose that started everything continued to work perfectly, feeding fuel to our heating system and generator winter after winter. I checked it regularly, maintained it carefully, and appreciated it in a way I never had before. It was more than just a piece of equipment. It was a symbol of preparedness, community support, and the importance of emergency services. Sometimes new volunteers would ask about the security cameras we had installed around the garage, pointing at various pieces of equipment. We had upgraded our security significantly after the theft. "Why so many cameras?" they would ask. Tommy and I would exchange glances. "Let me tell you a story," one of us would say, about an HOA president who thought she had more authority than she actually did. And we would tell them about Karren Pemberton, the stolen propane hose, and the day she learned that interfering with emergency services has serious consequences. It became a cautionary tale, a training story, and a reminder to never take our equipment or our mission for granted. Years passed. The volunteer ambulance service continued serving Brattleboro and the surrounding communities. We upgraded vehicles, trained new volunteers, and responded to thousands of calls. The propane system that Karren had briefly disrupted kept working, winter after winter, keeping our equipment operational and our community safe. The HOA relationship remained positive. Robert eventually stepped down as president, replaced by Susan, who continued the collaborative approach. The annual donations kept coming, the barbecues continued, and the community support only grew stronger. I stayed involved with the volunteer service, eventually taking on more leadership responsibilities. Chief Richards retired at 70, and they asked me to step up as assistant chief. It was an honor I took seriously, always remembering the lessons learned during that strange, stressful winter when an HOA president thought she could steal our equipment. Jessica and I stayed in Brattleboro, building our life in the small Vermont town we loved. Our house was modest, our life was quiet, and we spent our time helping others through our respective jobs in emergency services and health care. On cold winter nights, when the wind howled outside and the snow piled up, I would sometimes stand in the warm garage, listening to the steady hum of the propane heater, watching it do its simple, essential job. I would think about how close we came to losing that capability, how one person's misguided sense of authority almost created a real crisis. But mostly, I felt grateful. Grateful for the community support we had, grateful for the volunteers who donated their time, grateful for the equipment that kept working, and grateful for the small-town values that ultimately prevailed over bureaucratic overreach. The ambulances sat ready in their bays, warm and operational, prepared to roll at a moment's notice. That readiness was built on countless small things: maintained equipment, trained volunteers, community support, and yes, a simple propane hose that fed fuel to our heating system. Karren Pemberton had tried to take that away over aesthetic concerns and misplaced authority. Instead, she had inadvertently strengthened it, teaching everyone involved about what really mattered in a community. It was not property values or perfect landscaping or enforced conformity. It was people taking care of each other, supporting essential services, and understanding that some things are more important than appearances. The propane hose remained exactly where it was, partially visible from the street, feeding the system that kept us operational. No one complained about it anymore. No one tried to remove it or screen it or regulate it. They left it alone, understanding finally what I had tried to tell Karren Pemberton that first day. This equipment saves lives, and nothing is more important than that.